They say loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It comes slowly, quietly, like rainwater slipping through cracks in a ceiling you stopped looking at years ago. At first, you barely notice it. A missed conversation, a dinner eaten in silence, a hand that no longer reaches for yours in the dark. Little things, ordinary things, the kind people tell themselves every marriage goes through. That's what I told myself anyway. For years. From the outside, my life looked perfect. The kind of life women are supposed to be grateful for. A beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood. A husband with a successful career. Fresh flowers on the dining table every Sunday. Matching dishes. Framed wedding photos still hanging on the hallway wall. People looked at us and saw stability. But they didn't see the silence. They didn't see how Daniel walked through the house like a visitor instead of a husband. They didn't see how conversations between us became schedules and reminders. Did you pay the electricity bill? I'll be late tonight. There's food in the fridge. That was marriage now. Not love, not warmth, just routine. Sometimes, I would sit across from him during dinner and wonder when exactly we disappeared. When did we stop laughing? When did we stop touching? When did I become invisible to the man who once looked at me like I was the center of his world? I used to ask myself if it was my fault. Maybe I changed. Maybe I became boring. Maybe this was simply what happened after enough years together. But deep down, I knew the truth was more painful than that. We stopped choosing each other, and once that happens, the silence grows fast. Daniel buried himself in work. Late-night phone calls, business trips, endless emails glowing against his face while I sat beside him pretending not to care. At night, he'd slide into bed hours after I was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes his shoulder brushed mine, accidentally, and even that tiny touch felt foreign, like touching a stranger. I stopped asking him to spend time with me because rejection hurts less when you expect it. So instead, I learned how to become small. I filled my days with routines. Grocery shopping, laundry, cooking meals nobody appreciated anymore, cleaning rooms that already looked spotless. I became good at pretending. Pretending I was fine, pretending I wasn't lonely, pretending I didn't ache every time. I watched couples laughing together in restaurants or holding hands in parking lots. Then my sister died. Even now, saying those words still feels unreal. Cancer. Fast, cruel, merciless. 1 month she was alive, complaining about hospital food and joking about how awful the nurses were. The next month she was gone. And Ethan was left alone. 19 years old. Too young to lose his mother. Too young to carry that kind of grief in his eyes. Of course we took him in. There was never a question. Daniel agreed immediately, practical as always. He can stay as long as he needs. Simple, efficient, like discussing weather. But I remembered the day. Ethan arrived more clearly than I remembered my own wedding anniversary. Rain poured from the sky in thick silver sheets. Thunder rolled low in the distance. He stood on our porch soaked through, one suitcase beside him. Shoulders tense like he was trying not to fall apart in front of anyone. He looked exhausted. Not physically, soul exhausted. I opened the door before he could knock twice. For a second, he just stood there staring at me, eyes red from lack of sleep and too much grief. And something inside me cracked. Not desire, not then, just pain. I pulled him inside quickly, fussing over him the way women do when they don't know how else to comfort someone. "You're freezing," I whispered. I handed him towels, made tea. Heated leftovers even though he insisted he wasn't hungry. Daniel offered condolences, patted his shoulder awkwardly, then disappeared into his office for another conference call. And somehow that left Ethan and me alone in the kitchen together. I remember him sitting at the table quietly while steam curled from his teacup. The house felt different that night. Softer somehow. Human. "I still keep thinking she's going to text me," he admitted suddenly. His voice cracked on the last word. My chest tightened. I sat beside him carefully. "I know." "No, you don't," he whispered, staring down at his hands. "I don't even know who I am without her." That sentence stayed with me, because I understood it more than he realized. Not the grief exactly, but the emptiness, the feeling of becoming untethered from your own life. That night I stayed with him until almost 2 a.m, talking quietly in the kitchen while rain battered the windows outside. He told me stories about college classes he barely cared about anymore, about how his mother used to sing while cooking, about how quiet his apartment felt after she died. And I listened, really listened, maybe because nobody had listened to me in a very long time. Over the next few weeks, Ethan settled into the house slowly. At first, everything felt innocent, normal. He'd sit at the counter while I cooked dinner, offer to help carry groceries, ask me how my day was with genuine interest instead of distracted politeness. Small things. But after years of feeling invisible, small things become dangerous. One afternoon, I caught myself laughing at something he said and realized I couldn't remember the last time laughter came so naturally to me. Another night, he complimented my cooking, and I nearly cried afterward alone in the bathroom because Daniel hadn't noticed anything I did in years. That's how it begins. Not with passion, not with seduction, but with attention, with being seen. I hated how much I started looking forward to hearing Ethan come downstairs in the morning. I hated how the house felt emptier when he went out. And most of all, I hated the awareness growing quietly between us. Because eventually, I began noticing things I shouldn't. The way his eyes lingered on me sometimes. The way conversations stretched longer than necessary. The way silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable. One evening I was cooking while soft music played from my phone near the sink. Daniel had texted hours earlier saying he'd be working late again. Of course he was. Ethan wandered into the kitchen, wearing gray sweatpants and a damp t-shirt. From the rain outside, his hair was messy, curls still wet around his forehead. "You always cook when you're stressed," he said casually. I glanced at him. "Do I?" "Yeah." He leaned against the counter watching me stir sauce in a pot. "It makes the house feel alive." My hands paused. Such a simple sentence, but something about the way he said it wrapped around my chest. Alive. Nobody had used that word around me in years. I laughed softly to cover the sudden emotion rising in my throat. "It's just pasta." "No," he said quietly. "It's more than that." Our eyes met for a second too long, and there it was. That shift. Small. Dangerous. I looked away first. After that, I became hyper-aware of everything. Every accidental touch. Every glance. Every moment his voice softened when he spoke to me. And I fought it. God, I tried. I reminded myself constantly who he was. My nephew. A grieving boy. Family. But loneliness makes liars of people. Especially lonely people who've forgotten what warmth feels like. Daniel noticed nothing. Or maybe he stopped looking long ago. Sometimes he'd come home late and find Ethan and me talking in the living room. He'd barely acknowledge us before disappearing upstairs. No jealousy. No curiosity. Nothing. Part of me resented him for that. Another part felt guilty for wanting him to notice at all. One Saturday evening, rain trapped us indoors again. Daniel locked himself in his office for most of the day while I cooked simply to keep my hands busy. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary. Warm light glowed beneath the cabinets. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the sky. Ethan stood nearby watching me peel potatoes. "You make ordinary things feel peaceful," he said. I smiled faintly. "Cooking isn't exactly magical." "Maybe not," he replied. "But you are." The knife nearly slipped from my hand. Silence filled the room instantly. Heavy. Breathing became difficult. He looked shocked he'd said it aloud. I should have ended the moment right there. I should have laughed it off or reminded him boundaries existed for a reason. Instead, I whispered, "Ethan," and my voice sounded weaker than I intended. He stepped closer slowly. Not enough to touch. Just enough to make my heartbeat stumble. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Nobody sees how much you do?" The sadness in his eyes destroyed me. Because he was right. Nobody did. Not anymore. I turned back toward the stove quickly before he could see emotion building behind my eyes. "You should go finish your assignment," I said softly. But he didn't move. "Auntie?" That word sounded different now. More fragile, more dangerous. I closed my eyes briefly. "Yes? If I told you something honest..." He hesitated. "Would you hate me?" My entire body tensed. I already knew. Before he said anything else, I knew. And fear crawled slowly into my chest because part of me didn't want him to stop. "That depends on what it is," I whispered. The rain outside intensified. Thunder shook the windows faintly. And in that quiet kitchen, filled with warmth and rosemary and everything we should have been afraid of. Ethan looked at me with grief and longing tangled together in his eyes. "I think about you all the time," he admitted softly. My breath caught. No one moved. No one spoke. I could hear my heartbeat so loudly it almost drowned out the storm outside. "You shouldn't," I said finally. But the words lacked strength, because the truth was, I thought about him too, and both of us knew it. He looked down immediately, ashamed. "I'm sorry." "You don't understand," I whispered. "No," he interrupted painfully. "I do." Then he walked away. Just like that, leaving me alone in the kitchen, gripping the counter so tightly my fingers hurt. I stood there long after he disappeared upstairs. Dinner burned slightly in the oven. Thunder echoed through the house. And for the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth I'd been running from for weeks. Something was happening between us. Something wrong. Something fragile. Something that already felt impossible to stop. That night I lay beside Daniel, staring into darkness while his back faced me from the opposite side of the bed. So close, and impossibly far away. I thought about Ethan upstairs, unable to sleep beneath the same roof. I thought about loneliness, about grief, about the terrifying human need to feel wanted. And somewhere deep inside myself, beneath all the guilt and fear and shame, I realized the line had already begun to blur. Not because of one touch, not because of one confession, but because somewhere along the way, two lonely people stopped feeling invisible around each other. And once that happens, nothing stays simple for long. After that night in the kitchen, nothing felt normal anymore. Not the house, not the silence, not even my own reflection. It was as if something invisible had shifted between Ethan and me. Something neither of us could undo now that it had finally been spoken aloud. We tried to pretend otherwise at first. We really did. For a few days he avoided me. Breakfast became quiet again. Short answers. Careful distance. He stayed longer on campus, disappeared into his room early, barely looked at me when we crossed paths in the hallway. And somehow that hurt more than it should have. Because now I noticed his absence. Constantly. I would hear the front door open and feel my chest tighten before I could stop myself. I would catch my eyes drifting toward the staircase, waiting for him to come down. Waiting for one smile. One conversation. One moment that made the house feel alive again. I hated myself for it. Every single day, I kept repeating the same thing in my mind. You are his aunt. You are married. You know better. But loneliness is dangerous because eventually it stops caring about right and wrong. It only cares about relief. Daniel noticed nothing. Or maybe he noticed everything and simply didn't care enough to ask. He remained buried inside his endless world of meetings and business trips and glowing screens. Some nights he barely spoke 10 words to me before going to bed. I started wondering what was worse, being betrayed or being forgotten. One evening, I was folding laundry in the living room when Ethan finally spoke more than a sentence to me again. You don't have to avoid me, I said quietly without looking up. Silence. Then his voice came carefully. I'm trying to do the right thing. The pain in those words wrapped around my throat. I folded another towel slowly. And what is the right thing? He laughed once bitterly, probably not wanting my aunt. My hands froze. The room suddenly felt too warm. You think I wanted this? He continued softly. You think I planned it? I looked up then. His eyes were exhausted again. Not with grief this time, but with guilt. And somehow that almost made it worse. Ethan... No, it's okay, he interrupted gently. I know nothing can happen. I know it's messed up. Nothing can happen. Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they left an ache behind. Because part of me had already crossed somewhere dangerous emotionally. Even if physically we still stood miles apart. He moved toward the staircase, then stopped halfway. You know what the worst part is? He asked quietly. I couldn't answer. It's that you're the first person who's made me feel safe since my mom died. Then he disappeared upstairs, and I sat there staring at neatly folded towels through blurred vision. Safe, that word broke something inside me. Because nobody had made me feel safe in years either. After that conversation, the distance between us slowly disappeared again. Not intentionally. That's what terrified me most. It happened naturally, like water slipping through cracks. One night became movie nights in the living room again. Conversations returned. Soft laughter in the kitchen returned. Long talks after midnight while Daniel worked late returned. And every moment felt both comforting and dangerous at the same time. I started dressing differently without realizing it. Brushing my hair twice instead of once. Putting on lipstick even when leaving the house for nothing important. Small things. But deep down I knew why. I wanted to feel seen. And Ethan saw everything. One rainy Friday night, Daniel called saying he'd be away until Sunday morning for another work trip. I barely reacted anymore. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring. At the dark window above. The sink while thunder rolled. Somewhere far away. You okay? I turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. I nodded automatically. Just tired. He walked closer and handed me one of the mugs carefully. Our fingers brushed. That tiny contact sent warmth racing through me instantly. Neither of us pulled away fast enough. The silence that followed felt enormous. "You deserve better than this," he said suddenly. I frowned slightly. "Better than what?" "This." His eyes searched mine painfully. "Feeling alone in your own house." Emotion rose so quickly in my chest it almost scared me. "You don't understand marriage," I whispered. "No," he replied quietly. "But I understand loneliness." And God. That was the problem. He did. Too well. The storm worsened throughout the night. Rain hammered against the windows, while wind rattled the trees outside. Around midnight, the power flickered once, then again. The house felt strangely intimate in darkness. Too intimate. I should have gone upstairs. Instead, we stayed in the living room talking softly while candlelight flickered between us. He told me stories about his mother again, about childhood memories, about how terrified he was the night she died. I held her hand, he admitted quietly, and I knew she was slipping away, but I couldn't stop it. Tears filled his eyes instantly. Without thinking, I reached for him. Instinct. Comfort. That's what I told myself. He moved closer immediately, head lowering until it rested against my shoulder. And suddenly I was holding him, my arms wrapped around him while his breathing shook unevenly against my neck. "It's okay," I whispered. But the words sounded broken because nothing about this felt okay anymore. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Neither of us moved. I could feel his heartbeat, feel the warmth of his skin, feel the terrible ache growing between comfort and desire. Then softly, "Auntie?" "Yes?" "I don't know how to stop needing you." My eyes closed instantly. Every warning inside me screamed at once. This is wrong. This is dangerous. Stop now. But loneliness had already weakened parts of me I thought were stronger. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to stop needing him either. A loud crack of thunder shook the windows. The lights died completely. Darkness swallowed the room. I felt him tense against me slightly, and then his hand touched mine. Carefully, questioningly. I should have pulled away. Instead, my fingers curled around his. One terrible decision, one fragile moment. That's all it took. He lifted his head slowly until our faces were inches apart. Even in darkness, I could feel the weight of his gaze. My breathing became uneven. "So tell me no," he whispered. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because part of me wanted this. God help me. Part of me had wanted this for longer than I dared admit. His hand rose carefully to my face, hesitant enough to give me every chance to stop him. I didn't. And when his lips brushed mine softly for the first time, the world inside me shattered. Not passion, not hunger, something sadder than that. Two lonely people reaching for warmth in the wrong place. The kiss lasted only seconds. But seconds are enough to ruin lives. I pulled away first, breathing hard. "We can't," I whispered instantly. His forehead rested against mine. I know. But neither of us moved. That was the worst part. If it had felt ugly, maybe stopping would have been easier. Instead, it felt devastatingly human. The next morning, guilt hit me before my eyes fully opened. I stared at the ceiling, unable to breathe properly. Memories flooded back all at once. His hand, his voice, his lips against mine. A quiet panic spread through my chest. I sat up quickly. Empty bed, cold room, reality. Downstairs, the house felt painfully silent again. A half-finished mug of coffee sat abandoned near the sink. Ethan's jacket was gone. Then I noticed the note, "Out for a while." That was it. No warmth, no explanation, just distance. And suddenly I realized something horrifying. I missed him already. I spent the entire day unraveling quietly, cleaning things that were already clean, starting laundry twice because I forgot what I was doing halfway through, standing at windows watching rain slide down, glass while guilt hollowed me out from the inside. I kept replaying the kiss over and over, not because I wanted to remember it, because I couldn't stop. By late afternoon, the front door finally opened. My heart reacted before my mind could stop it. Ethan stepped inside slowly, damp from rain again, eyes tired. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally I whispered, "We shouldn't have done that." Pain flickered across his face immediately. "I know. But it can't happen again." Silence. He nodded once. "Okay." That should have ended it, but some endings come too late. Over the next week, we tried desperately to return to normal, and failed. Because now every glance carried memory inside it. Every accidental touch felt charged. Every silence held words we were too afraid to say aloud. Daniel remained oblivious, or pretending to be. One evening during dinner, he finally looked at me properly for the first time in months. "You seem distracted lately," he said casually. My stomach dropped instantly. I'm fine. His eyes lingered on me longer than usual, then on Ethan, and suddenly the room felt ice cold. But Daniel only returned to his food again without another word. Still, something had shifted. He sensed it. Maybe not the truth, but the distance, the tension, the storm beneath the surface. And fear settled permanently into my chest after that. A few nights later, I woke during another thunderstorm. Wind rattled the windows violently. The house groaned softly around me. Daniel was away again. Of course he was. I sat up in bed trying to calm the strange heaviness pressing against my ribs. Then came the knock. Soft, barely audible, but enough. I froze instantly. Another knock. My entire body already knew who stood outside before my feet touched the floor. I should have stayed in bed. I should have ignored it. Instead, I opened the door. Ethan stood there breathing unevenly, eyes glassy with emotion. I'm sorry, he whispered immediately. I know I shouldn't be here. Then why are you? The question never left my mouth. Because deep down, I knew why. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. I had a nightmare, he admitted quietly, about my mom. His voice cracked apart on the last word, and every protective instinct inside me shattered instantly. Ethan! I just didn't want to be alone tonight. That sentence destroyed whatever strength I still had left, because neither did I. I stepped aside silently. He entered slowly. Thunder rolled outside while shadows moved across the walls. For a long moment we simply stood there facing each other in silence heavy enough to drown inside. Then softly, please just hold me. And God forgive me. I did. I wrapped my arms around him and felt him break apart against me completely, his face buried against my neck, my hands trembling through his hair, both of us clinging to something we should never have touched. And somewhere between grief and loneliness and desperation, the line disappeared entirely. When he kissed me again, I kissed him back. Not because it was right, not because it was love, but because after years of feeling invisible, unwanted, untouched, I wanted to feel alive for one selfish, terrible moment. And that moment changed everything. The next morning, sunlight crept weakly through the curtains while shame settled into every corner of the room. Reality looked uglier in daylight. I sat at the edge of the bed wrapped in silence and guilt so heavy I thought it might crush me. Ethan stood near the door, unable to meet my eyes. Neither of us knew what to say now, because no explanation existed big enough for what we had done. Finally, he whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly. You already did. His face crumpled slightly, and somehow that hurt too. He left quietly after that. The door closed. Footsteps faded, and I finally broke. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet devastation. The kind that empties a person slowly. Days passed. Then weeks. The house became unbearable. Ethan withdrew into himself completely. No more lingering conversations. No more warmth. Just distance and guilt and silence. Daniel watched me more carefully now. Questions lingered in his eyes. But he never asked them aloud. Maybe he was afraid of the answers, or maybe we had both become experts at pretending. Eventually, Ethan moved out. He claimed he wanted independence again, a place closer to campus. Daniel accepted the explanation easily. I didn't stop him, because what else could I do? The day he carried his final box to the car, he paused at the front door. For one terrible second, it felt like the entire world held its breath. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I nodded because words no longer mattered. Then he left, and just like that, the house became quiet again. Only this time the silence wasn't empty. It was haunted. 2 years have passed since then. Daniel and I still live together, but not really. Some things survive betrayal. Others simply continue existing beside it. Ethan never came back. Sometimes he texts on holidays. Short messages, careful distance, as if we're both terrified of reopening something that already destroyed enough. And me? I still think about that question sometimes. Auntie, would you say yes if I told you what I really wanted? I should have said no. I know that now. Not because loneliness isn't real. Not because grief doesn't make people desperate for warmth. But because some moments don't just change your life. They change the way you see yourself forever. And the hardest part isn't losing him. It isn't even the guilt. It's knowing how easy it was to become someone I never believed I could be. All because one lonely woman wanted to feel seen again. And one lonely boy wanted to feel loved. Sometimes, I still walk through this house at night listening to the silence around me. And I think about how disasters rarely begin loudly. Sometimes they begin with kindness. Sometimes with loneliness. sometimes with a simple question asked during a storm. And sometimes, all it takes to ruin everything is one quiet, fragile yes.